It was bad enough when the New York Mets could not come to terms with their stolen base guru, Antoan Richardson. Now it's worse. He's going to the Braves.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. If you want to find any of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download FanDuel today. Well, when the New York Mets could not come to terms with Antoan Richardson to return as their first base coach, it was already a bad look because Antoan Richardson was clearly outstanding at his job during the 2025 season. And that's where the most efficient base stealing team in Major League Baseball history. He had an outstanding season where you actually notice the work of a first base coach, something that we never notice. Can you name another first base coach in Mets history? Honestly, because I don't know if I can. I'd have to think long and hard, and it's just not something that's ever been important to me. Seemingly until this situation with Antoan Richardson and until the events of Wednesday. Because not only did Antoan Richardson leave the New York Mets, he left the Mets for the Atlanta Braves. And to make matters worse, Jeremy Hefner is coming with him. That's right. The Atlanta Braves put out a press release today that they had officially hired Antoan Richardson to be their new first base coach, Jeremy Hefner to be their new pitching coach. Lateral moves for both guys. Now, with Jeremy Hefner, you can't have any gripes about it because the Mets declined to pick up his option. They had an option to bring him back. They declined it. He was a free agent. That was the Mets' decision to allow him to go out into the market and do whatever he wanted to do. Jeremy Hefner had been the Mets pitching coach for a long time. I think you definitely could have made the case that the Mets should have retained him just based on the fact that in May, he was being hailed as, one of the best pitching coaches in baseball. And oh my God, look at Griffin Canning and Tyler McGill and Clay Holmes making the transition to be a starter. He has the best pitching staff in baseball in the middle of May because Jeremy Hefner is so good. Remember what he did last year with Luis Severino and Sean Manaea. This guy was, almost at a level that Antoan Richardson reached at the end of the season in May because of what happened in 2024 and just the general consensus around the industry. This guy's a very good pitching coach. Then the second half of the season happens. The Mets go on a complete tailspin. Their pitching is a disaster. And I get the Mets saying, you know what? We need new voices. We're not going to be able to completely turn over a roster. It's not going to happen. They can make additions and they will, but you're not going to change the core of the team, down to the studs and completely start over anything crazy. You made the decision to retain Carlos Mendoza. How do you change up that clubhouse? How do you change up your process as a team? You try to bring in some brighter and better minds. You try to bring in some really intelligent coaches. Not that the other ones weren't, but just some new coaches with new outlooks that can give you a fresh look for your baseball team. I understood why the Mets made the decisions that they did, including getting rid of Jeremy Hefner, even though if you had told me at the end of the season, before all the firings were made, all the decisions were made, if you had asked me, should Jeremy Hefner come back, I probably would have said, yeah, I don't know if you're going to find that much of a better pitching coach. Antoan Richardson was the one guy that the Mets wanted back for sure. Carlos Mendoza is coming back, and so is Antoan Richardson, is actually how it was initially reported. But it turned out Antoan Richardson's contract was not decided. He did not have a contract already locked in, so it came to negotiation time. And these sides could not come to terms on a deal, and then it was reported that they likely would not come to terms on a deal. Now we know where Richardson's going, and it's the Braves. And luckily, we also actually know some of the behind-the-scenes details about what happened here. I'm going to talk about the article in the next segment by the New York Post because I do think that when you get into the reporting, you could absolve the Mets a little bit but I don't want to let them off the hook in the first segment of the show today. Because optically, this is still just, I don't want to say a disaster because it's still a first base coach, but it's as bad of a look as you could ever have for a base coach. For both of these guys, for Hefner and Richardson to end up with the Braves, it's just a bad look. For them to take all these intimate details of how the Mets are run and now they're in Atlanta. It's just the last team that you'd want to hire these guys outside of maybe the Phillies. Really, the last team. If Antoan Richardson was the first base coach for the Yankees, I don't know how much people would be irate about it. Maybe they would be. Maybe Mets fans would still find a way to be upset about that. But for me, oh well, you're not really competing with the Yankees. You're competing with the Braves. And if the Atlanta Braves all of a sudden are the most efficient base stealing team in baseball because Antoan Richardson is that good, and he actually has them at that level where all of a sudden Matt Olson comes out of nowhere and swipes 20 bags. She'd say it's unlikely, but no one saw Juan Soto stealing 38 this year. So you never know what can happen. And Jeremy Hefner with a pitching staff that has a revitalized Spencer Strider that he's credited with. And they have Chris Sale and Spencer Schwellenbach. And who knows? Maybe the Braves go out and they sign a starting pitcher. And now this rotation is great. And Hefner is getting the credit. And their base stealing is great. And Richardson's getting the credit. And the Braves are running away with the NL East. Yeah, it's going to come back and it's going to sting. But that's also giving a ton of credit to Richardson and Hefner. And maybe it is overselling what their impact is as coaches. But I know why Mets fans today are pissed off. I get it, especially when the idea that the Mets wanted Richardson back and they couldn't find terms on a deal. Steve Cohen's Mets, who have so much money, could not find a little something tucked in between the couch cushions. They couldn't find any little bit of money to set aside for Antoan Richardson to retain him. It really had to come to this where Antoan Richardson is going to the Braves over salary. Like, that's really how this whole thing ends, is that Antoan Richardson, who you wanted back, you just couldn't pay him when you're paying Juan Soto $51 million a season, when you gave Juan Soto, what was it, a $75 million signing bonus a year ago? But now when base coaches, typically from my research, which, I mean, how much can you trust on the old Google? But base coaches are making, at best, a couple $100,000 a year. So what did Antoan Richardson ask for? Did he ask to get paid more than Carlos Mendoza's $1.5 million? The only salary that we know as far as the coaches are concerned. Because all that's private information. We just really don't know what these guys get paid. But how outrageous was his ask? That the Mets just put their hands up and said, yeah, you know, we can't find that, Antoine. We can't pay you what you think you're worth. So sorry. But I guess we're not going to come to terms on a deal. You can go out into the market and you can talk to other teams. I just, while the information that I've learned from reading the story in the New York Post does in some ways make me understand what happened here, it still shouldn't have happened. You still should have found a way to get Antoan Richardson back. Because if just Jeremy Hefner is going to the Braves, while it would be like, okay, of course, it's not a big story. It's not something that I'd spend an entire show on. But when both Antoan Richardson and Jeremy Hefner are going to the Braves and they just poach two of your coaches, yeah, it's a big story. And it just feels like Alex Anthopoulos and the Braves are almost just trying to poke the Mets. They're just trying to poke fun at the situation by bringing these guys in. Now, they're good coaches, but it just feels like by hiring both, it's just sort of sending a little message, it's, hey, we want to, have that fan base that you have just go nuts. We want to embarrass you, really. That's what it feels like, even if it's not actually the case. But we're going to talk about in the next segment is some details behind Antoan Richardson's negotiation with the Mets and why they might not be all to blame for this not ending up with him coming back to help Juan Soto try to steal 40 next year. We're going to talk about those details here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and you're going to get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. You pick a bet, you put down $5, and if it hits, you're going to unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, whether you're looking at player props, building a same-game parlay, even if you want to jump in live as the action's unfolding. FanDuel is there for you and makes watching basketball and football even more exciting. We got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel is going to make the game day experience that much better. It's quick, it's easy. It's the best way to add a little more energy to game day. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. We're nearly 150 away. I really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Now, the New York Post had a great story written by Mike Puma titled Antoan Richardson Tells the Post What Led to His Split with the Mets. And so we get some information from Richardson, and Mike Puma also seemed to get some information from the club themselves. So here is what Antoan Richardson said via text to the Post. He says, I was very interested in returning to the Mets, but during the negotiation process, we weren't fully aligned on how we viewed my value. Richardson rejected an offer from the club, according to a source, but then circled back near the end of the process and sought the same deal. So here's the thing. Antoan Richardson rejected the Mets offer, shopped the deal, and did not find a better deal or found similar deals on the market and came back to the New York Mets asking to return on the deal that they proposed, which does suggest that whatever contract it was fair market value for Antoan Richardson. They were not cheaping out. They did not want to meet whatever his ask was, but maybe his ask was crazy. Further details in this story, it says, but at that point, so when Richardson comes back at the end of the process of talking to other teams and seeks that same deal, at that point, the Mets weren't in position to offer Richardson the same deal because the issue was a benefits package, which includes a pension. It says each team, according to the collective bargaining agreement, is allowed to offer a pension to 4 coaches and the manager. By the time Richardson circled back to the Mets, according to a source, the club had already hired new coaches and given one of them the lone remaining pension slot. Carlos Mendoza, obviously, is one of the guys that gets the pension, but you have 4 other coaches that you're able to give it to. You just hired a bench coach. I imagine Kai Correa probably got it. You hired a new director of hitting. So Jeff Albert maybe got it. You hired Troy Snitker. So those are your major hires. Should your hitting coaches get paid more than your base coach? Based on my research, which again, there's actually very little information you can find about this, but from what you can try to corroborate throughout a Google search, it does seem like managers get paid way more. Pitching coaches and hitting coaches are then the next up in terms of tier, and base coaches and other coaches on the staff fall below that. So giving those pension slots to these other guys, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially if Antoan Richardson, you try to come to terms, he walked away, say he's interviewing with other teams, and then he comes back after probably all this reporting that the Mets and Richardson were going to come to terms with the deal. They hire Snitker. He comes back asking for that same deal, but that deal's off the table. You just gave it away to another coach because maybe you needed to entice Troy Snitker to take your job as the hitting coach with the pension package. Who knows? And then all of a sudden you lose him. But I just don't know. A little more information here that we have in the story from the Post. It says a source indicated the club originally declined Richardson's request for a pay raise to avoid a situation in which the club might be forced to choose between raising other coaches' coaching salaries and alienating other members of the staff whose compensation lagged. Now, that's where you can then go back and say, well, wait a minute. Richardson wanted a raise. What was the raise? And why were they unwilling to meet it? How crazy was that raise? Was it getting to the point where all coaches were making a salary that they deemed just too much and setting a precedent that they didn't want to hold themselves accountable for moving forward, where now every coach under the manager is making like $500K a year? You think that it's really just small potatoes and it doesn't matter. And on the grand scheme of things, if you're going to sign a relief pitcher to a $2 million deal, or if you're going to sign, or how about this one? Let's just say, the Mets didn't have Acuna and they got a speed first, like center fielder, right? That they're going to pay a $2 million salary to. Where maybe just having Antoan Richardson, you get the same or way more value on the base pass for way less. Like, I understand when you start to get into the minutia of this, and it came down to they didn't want to give him a raise, so they didn't want to give him a raise at all, and that's where I think it just gets very interesting. Maybe the Mets at the end of the season said, "Hey, Antoine, you're the only one left with Carlos Mendoza. We would love to get you this benefits package. They're going to get a pension. You're going to get X, Y, and Z. This is what it's going to mean for you. Your salary is going to stay the same, but this is what it's going to mean for you," because maybe they wanted to keep their base coach salaries at a certain level, because they can't have the base coach making more than the pitching coach and the hitting coach. And then again, everyone rises up. The only part about that confuses me is where it says alienating other members of the staff whose compensation lagged. What does that mean? Because you cleared the staff. Unless you're saying that Antoan Richardson wanted more than Carlos Mendoza, which obviously I'm sure he didn't. Your bullpen catchers have been the same forever. Eric Langell and Dave Racanello. Are they the coaches that stuck around whose salaries lacked? That's the part of it that it doesn't entirely make sense to me. Because we just don't know the details. We really don't. We don't know like the exact dollar amount. We don't know if the Mets offer was $150K and Richardson wanted $500K. We don't know if the Mets offer was $150 and he wanted $200, in which case, incredibly cheap move by the Mets. Another part of this story said Richardson, according to a source, also wanted a deal that would have allowed him to leave this offseason if a better opportunity arose elsewhere. Now you go back and say, okay, was this guy just completely overplaying his hand? Right? So hold on. Let me get this straight. You want a raise. You maybe wanted the benefits package. But hey, if you could get a bench coach job or something else elsewhere, then you're going to leave. And so that's where maybe Antoan Richardson just had this inflated perception of his value based on the season that he had. And the Mets maybe just got tired of negotiating with him and felt like he was asking for too much. That part of it, like, it gets to a point where I start to see why this deal didn't come together. And while I still think the optics are terrible, I think that this didn't come together just as much because of Richardson as the New York Mets, and if not more so Richardson, because of some of these stipulations that he wanted. The idea that he wants a raise, but he also wants the opportunity to leave if a better job shows up. What's going on there? And then here's more. Richardson said he hoped to remain with the Mets. Quote, "Once I was allowed to speak with the teams, I remained open to a return to Queens until the end, while also focusing on finding an opportunity that was more in line with what I was looking for. After connecting with several teams about different roles, ranging from first base coach to bench coach, Atlanta proved to be the right fit." So if he got a bench coach job, trust me, he would have taken the bench coach job. So maybe he interviewed some places, who knows? So those were the range, right? First base coach, bench coach. All right. He did circle back to the Mets. Again, you go back to the beginning. After the whole process happens, he gets to the point where he circles back to the Mets, but at that point, the Mets did not have that pension plan. So when he says an opportunity more in line with what I was looking for, it couldn't have been that much better than what the Mets gave him because he circled back to the Mets. to ask for that same deal, and then he would have come back. I've gotten to a point where I think this is just as much Antoan Richardson's fault as it is David Stern's fault, if not more so. I don't know. I don't know how much credence I should give to that reporting and how much we should let the Mets off the hook. But here's what I'll say. At the end of the day, if you think Antoan Richardson is the difference for the New York Mets making or missing the playoffs this year, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you. I think the Mets can hire a perfectly good first base coach. They can still steal bases, and they can be fine. I don't think that that's going to be the end-all be-all, and that this is a great stain on the franchise that they can never overcome. It's a first base coach. And as far as Jeremy Hefner, they let him go. We're going to talk about the final segment today is the long pitching coach that just can't seem to get the deal done with the Mets because they haven't announced it officially. Maybe it comes this week, but I'm finally going to talk about Justin Willard. So we'll get into the potential new pitching coach for the New York Mets in just a minute. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right means cashing in. With football back, Prize Picks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you could turn your takes into real prizes, all in less than 60 seconds. It's quick, it's easy. Honestly, it's my favorite way to follow along with football, with basketball. And the best part is you can follow along with both at the same time because you can make picks in each sport and have them in your same line. The best part, if one of your picks misses, Prize Picks event to the flex play, so you can still double your money. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me. Anytime news breaks on the Mets, you can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways and get a line graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, it's been sort of whispered, or not even whispered, it's been reported 4 days now. The New York Mets have a pitching coach lined up, but there is no official word. So we're going off of what has been reported that Justin Willard will become the Mets' new pitching coach, but we're still waiting for that press release where the Mets say, okay, he's our guy. But let's talk about who Justin Willard is. He's 35 years old. He was the Boston Red Sox director of pitching, very similar to Jeff Albert, who the Mets just hired to be their director of Major League Hitting. He was, previously just their director of hitting in the minor leagues. Very similar role that Justin Willard had, where he was working under Andrew Bailey, breaking down video and data, but also working throughout the system. So this is a guy that has really great knowledge of how to break down film, how to understand the biomechanics for pitchers, the data, and to help implement it. And you're getting a guy that is clearly on the rise in the industry, who was working for a big market team, who definitely has been pretty solid developing pitching. You look this year, they had Peyton Tolley and what is his name? Connolly Ely, I believe. Yeah, Connolly Early, who both came up and were pitching down the stretch for them. A couple pitching prospects. They had, this old Lucas Giolito had a pretty solid season there. Obviously, Garrett Crochet was amazing. I don't know how much you credit the Red Sox with that or just credit Crochet, but I think this is a good hire for the New York Mets, assuming they officially make it. Justin Willard previously had spent years as a minor league coach and coordinator for the Twins, which is funny because that's also where Jeremy Hefner got his start. And so now we'll see how this goes, but I think Justin Willard is a fine hire if that's where the Mets go. They're still going to have to hire some assistant pitching coaches. They still need base coaches. So there's still work to be done in this coaching staff, but it's clear that they have skewed A, younger with these hires so far, and B, into guys that really understand analytics and hopefully can coach up players based on all the data they're able to process. And I'm curious to see the results for the New York Mets. as much as a bad season can sort of taint the viewpoint for a fan base, I feel, where, when it goes bad the way the Mets season did, everything that the organization is doing is now wrong. Where after the 2024 season, when everything was great, everyone has their rosy red, covered glasses on. Everything that the Mets do is perfect, right? Here's what I think gets lost in all of this back and forth. The New York Mets were a clown show forever. And it's so easy to fall back into it. It is. You got to break those patterns, right? You got to break those habits. It's like when you're trying to lose weight, right? You can put together a good week or two, but it's always easy to fall right back into the habits that got you fat in the first place. That's always going to be your norm until you, over time, really do continuously work on creating better habits. I don't think that the Mets right now are making poor decisions. I really don't. I think the Mets have a clear-headed executive who's very good at his job, who built one of the now premier organizations in Major League Baseball when it comes to a small market, well-run team. The Brewers have become a machine, and David Stearns built that machine. And I also don't buy into the fact that, he did it in a small market, he can't do it in a big market. I don't prescribe to that belief. The Mets have a good process about how they do things. They do things the right way. That is why they are able to attract very good coaches, very good executives. The people that they have hired over the past 2 years under David Stearns are people that were not even interviewing with the New York Mets prior to the Cohen regime. And even when it was, okay, who's your GM? Who can you get to interview to be your GM? Nobody wanted to touch the Mets. Ever since David Stearns has come in, it's, the Astros head of scouting, Chris Gross, the guy that was in charge of their draft for years, he's coming to the Mets. You have Andy Green, who's getting managerial considerations for other teams, was interviewing for the Mets manager job. Now he's going to lead up, player development now for the Mets. Justin Willard, up-and-coming pitching guru, might become the new Mets pitching coach. Troy Snitker, really good hitting coach for years for the Astros, wants to come to the Mets. I think that this organization in the industry is way more highly regarded and respected than the fan base. But deep down, the fan base is still going to fall back into that same pattern of pessimism. And it makes sense when you have a season as disastrous as the 2025 season for the New York Mets. And now, once again, everything that the Mets do is wrong to this fan base, or at least if not a majority of the fan base, a vocal minority of the fan base that just can't stand this regime all of a sudden, only because the Mets had a really bad last 3.5 months of the season. And so now it's gotten to this way. And so now when Antoan Richardson and Jeremy Hefner leave for another team, the reaction is probably a little bit more outsized than it should be. The optics don't look good. I get it. But I don't think it means that David Stearns in this front office is suddenly brain dead. Honestly, from the information that we can actually look into, from what has been reported, sort of seems like Antoan Richardson overplayed his hand and tried to circle back. And at that point, the Mets moved on. That's what happened. That's what at least it seems like happened. So I don't think that this franchise is way off course or they're doing everything wrong. I just think that they continue to fall into some bad headlines. And it could just be how this team continues to be covered and just the general perception that the Mets are always sort of falling back into. And what they have to do is string together 4 or 5 good seasons where they're making the playoffs and they're not embarrassing themselves. And it's not just, hey, 2022 win 101 games. 2023 fire sale at the deadline. 2024 The Mets go to the NLCS 2025. They are a disaster. They buy at the deadline and they get worse and they fall out of the playoffs in a year where all they needed was 84 wins. They need to just have 2 good years in a row, 3 good years in a row, and then they can really start to shed the burden that this fan base feels. But for now, you're going to have to live with it because this is what you are as an organization. It just is what it is for the time being. But I still trust the process. All right, we somehow found a way to do an entire show on a first base coach leaving. How about that? That's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. Tomorrow's show, I do think I'm going to start to get into the Mets' top 20 prospects, so that should be a lot of fun. But we also have a potential for a lot of news. Brandon Woodruff, Shota Imanaga, these are guys that may or may not get qualifying offers, and to me, that is going to really change how we view them as free agents. It's going to really color their market. So depending on the news we get, we might do a little bit of free agency news along with the top prospects. If there's really nothing that's that interesting to talk about, we'll just, as far as the MLB news and the contract deadlines that take place on Thursday, then we will just dive deep into prospects for a Friday Farm Report. Really do appreciate all of you who tuned into the show today. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you're going to be Locked On Mets Insider, you can find a link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets.